Now, this node-based system is all very good, but there is a major issue with this kind of architecture that's been a defining factor between one software package and the next. And that is, how do we access these nodes? How do we see them and interact with them? As you can imagine, this is not an easy question to answer. In each case, each platform has defined its own way of working with nodes that make up a typical 3D scene. And it's this GUI approach that can determine how effective the software is, and also how successful it is both technically and in terms of user popularity. Let's have a look at 3 different approaches that have been used in the 3D software world out there. This will give us a better insight into what we're actually dealing with here in 3ds Max. What we're going to do in this chapter is we're going to look at the same problem, or a very similar problem, in 3 pieces of software: 3D Studio Max, Maya, and Houdini. And the problem that we're going to try and tackle is we're going to create 3 cubes, and we'll call them cube 1, 2, and 3. We're going to apply a lattice to cubes number 1 and 3. That means we'll be leaving the lattice off the cube in the middle. And then we'll be deforming both of those cubes using the shared lattice. Then what we want to do is we want to apply that lattice to the cube in the middle, so that when we deform the lattice, all 3 cubes are deformed in the way we would expect. So the first thing we'll do is we'll create the cube. I'll just draw it here in the viewport, and I'll draw it, and then I'll actually go in and change these dimensions so that they're a little bit more precise. There we are. And then if we look at the transform, we can see that it's got a transform of -24, -4, 0. So I'll zero out that value and I'll zero out that value, and we'll just use transform type-ins to actually get a slightly more accurate result here. So we can see that we have a dimension of 30, 30, 30 on our cube, and I want to move it off to the left and then leave a space in the middle for the middle cube, and then some space over to the right. So I'll just move it -30. There it goes, and it's in the right position now. And then what I'll do is I'll create a copy. I'll snap that to 0, and I'll create another copy, and we'll put that at 30. So there we are. We now have our 3 cubes. Now in each case we're going to give it just a few more subdivisions, just so that if we want to do anything exotic with our deformations, there's a little bit of geometry there. And we'll just turn on wireframe display. Now that we have our 3 cubes, let's put the lattice on there. So I'll select cube 1 and cube 3. Go into the modifier panel, and I'm going to go down and I'm going to apply an FFD2. So this is this will have 2 by 2 by 2 control points. There we go. And now I'm going to go into sub-object mode, and because I had these 2 objects selected, this modifies actually instance onto both of these. And I'm going to select these control points here and move them up here. And we'll just move these out here and out here, just so that we can see that our object is definitely deformed quite nicely. That's looking pretty cool. Now, what you can see is the thing that we're actually going to try and solve here. Right in the middle we've got cube number 2, and we want cube number 2 to actually be deformed like these 2 other objects. So the first thing we'll do is we'll hold down Control, and I'll drag and drop this modifier from the cube number 1 onto cube number 2. And that's actually instanced the modifier. And we need the instancing because when we go in and modify the control points, we want all of the objects to be deformed at the same time. So we need instancing. So if I go into object 2, as you can see, it's not actually following this profile, so we've got a bit of a problem here. And if I go in and grab these control points like this and then move them around, you can see that all the objects are deforming together. Now that's all pretty cool, but what I need to do is I actually need to get this lattice here and offset it so that this object actually sits in the middle, as it should do. Now to do that, I would actually have to move it over here by 30. units. But you can see the problem is, because it's instanced, it's actually moving the same lattice on all these other objects. So in this case, instancing the entire modifier is actually not going to do the trick for us. We need to come up with a slightly different approach. So let's go out of sub-object mode, and I'll just make this modifier unique by clicking on this button here. Make sure we're on the right object, make unique, and now we can go in and adjust the lattice. And I'm going to, you can see here it's offset on 30, so I'm just going to 0 that. And now the objects are actually all deforming to the correct kind of shape. Now, problem is, if I go to the control points and grab one and start moving it around, you can see that we've broken the instancing with the actual deformation lattice. So we've got to recreate that now. So I'll come out of sub-object mode again, and we'll have a look at this object using the curve editor, and that's just to have a look at the controllers. So if I go curve editor, I'll just expand it out a little bit. You can see here's box 2, it's a modified object, so we'll just open it up to show the modifiers. There's the FFD2, we want to go in and modify that in some way, and we can see we've got a lattice transform, and that's actually the gross transform of the lattice. We don't want to actually change that. We've got an offset value, that's of no use to us. And then we've got this master node here. And what this master node does is it actually stores subcontrollers, and it'll actually store one controller for each point in our lattice. Now at the moment it's actually blank, and we can't actually assign controllers in the usual way. If I right click on here and I say assign controllers, you can see it's actually grayed out. So we have to use the other way of assigning controllers in Max, and that's actually to put some kind of animation on the node. And then that will actually then assign controllers. Once we have controllers in place, we can start thinking about instancing them. So we'll just close down this window for a minute. I'll turn on animation, turn on auto key. I'll go into sub-object mode, grab the control points. I'll just grab all of them so we get a controller on everything. And I'll just move everything upwards. That's cool. So I'll come out of sub-object mode. We'll go into these two, and remember these have got an instance modifier, so we only have to pick one of them and apply the animation, and that will actually apply to both objects. So we'll go into the control points, turn on auto key. We're still on frame 5, so I can grab all the control points and I can move them upwards. And obviously that could actually be used to perform some kind of character animation if we wanted to. So as you can see, we've got an animation there now. So I'm going to put it back to frame 0. Now that we have our keyframes, we've got controllers. So I can actually delete these keyframes, and the controllers will remain. And what we're going to do now is we're going to link up the controllers for each control point on this lattice to the controllers for each control point on that lattice. And I know that the two sets of controllers will correspond exactly. So we've actually effectively got two lattices here. We've got the lattice on these two objects, and we've got this lattice here, which is unique. Now at the moment it's actually forming the same shape, but as we've seen, they are actually independent, so we need to link them up to actually get the objects to all share the same kind of lattice. So what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to use wiring, and then I'm going to show you how to do the same thing using scripting. And although the script that I've written to do this is very, very crude, it does actually show exactly what's going on. So it'll give you an idea of how quick it can be to actually use scripting to carry out the same thing. Now, what I'll do is I'll click on here and I'll say wire parameters, transform, modified object, FFD2, and these are all the control points. There is one control point for each point in the actual FFD lattice. So I'll click on control point 1. We're going to connect it to here. Same thing again, and we'll click on there. Now, in this case, I've actually clicked on the point 1 here and the point 1 here. You can see at the top I've got box 1 going to box 2. Now, we want this link to be omnidirectional, so I'll click on here and I'll click on connect. Click on the next two controllers, omnidirectional, connect. Next two controllers, omnidirectional, connect. Next two, omnidirectional, connect. Next two,